There are some marks on my left hand that will never fade. A faint scar runs from the base of my thumb to my wrist, the result of a broken glass during a catering shift when I was 19, working doubles to pay my way through community college. Most people don't notice it. My sister-in-law noticed it the moment I walked into her engagement party. "Is that a scar?" she said, loud enough for the people around her to hear. "God, Natalie, you couldn't have worn something to cover that up?" I smiled and said nothing. I had learned a long time ago that silence was the most powerful thing I owned. My name is Natalie Odom. I'm 31 years old. I work as a senior structural engineer for one of the largest infrastructure firms in the Southeast, and I have spent the better part of the last decade building bridges, literal ones, the kind that carry 50,000 cars a day over rivers and valleys. But the bridge between me and my brother's family has always been shaky, and the day of his wedding nearly collapsed it entirely. Let me start at the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning, the real one. My brother Marcus and I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. Our parents divorced when I was 8 and he was 11. Dad stayed local. Mom moved us to a smaller apartment on the east side. Worked 2 jobs, made it work. Marcus was always the golden one. Varsity basketball, homecoming court, the kind of kid teachers remembered fondly at reunions. I was the quiet one who spent lunch period in the library and cried in the bathroom after getting a B on a chemistry test. We were different. We were still close in the way siblings are when they've shared the same leaky ceiling and the same mother who sometimes cried behind a closed door at night. I loved him. I still do. That part never changed. What changed was Renata. Marcus met Renata Fossey at a work conference in Charlotte about 4 years ago. She came from money, old money, the kind that doesn't talk about itself but makes sure you feel it. Her father owned a regional chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. Her mother sat on the boards of 2 nonprofits and 1 private school. They lived in a neighborhood where the HOA fees were higher than my first apartment's rent. I tried with Renata. I genuinely did. I brought a bottle of good wine the first time Marcus brought her home to meet the family. I asked questions about her work. She was in marketing, something with brand partnerships, and I listened carefully to the answers. I was warm. I was appropriate. I was trying. Renata was not trying. It started small. A comment about my car. I drove a 7-year-old Honda at the time, perfectly good car, just not impressive. A question about whether I was still doing the construction thing, which is how she described structural engineering. A suggestion, once, that Marcus might want to think about elevating his social circle as he moved up in his career. That one she said to his face, not mine. But he told me about it later, laughing, like it was charming instead of cruel. When Marcus proposed and Renata's family started taking over the wedding planning, I felt myself being moved to the edges. The engagement party was held at the Fossey family home in Providence, Rhode Island, a 5-bedroom colonial with a pool and a guest cottage, and I flew up on a Friday night after a full week on a job site in Georgia. I showed up in a navy wrap dress and my good earrings, and I was told by Renata's mother within 15 minutes that the dress code had been cocktail attire, somewhat formal. My dress was cocktail attire. I smiled and said I'd keep it in mind for next time. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a slow accumulation of small cuts. I was a bridesmaid. Marcus had insisted, but Renata's 3 sorority sisters were the ones who got to pick the dresses, plan the bachelorette weekend in Scottsdale, hold the emergency pins and the lipstick on the day itself. I was included in the group chat but rarely consulted. At the final dress fitting, one of Renata's friends looked at me adjusting the neckline in the mirror and said cheerfully, "You're so brave for wearing something fitted, I could never." I turned to look at her. She smiled. I smiled back. The wedding was held on a Saturday in May at a restored historic estate outside of Raleigh. It was genuinely beautiful. White dogwood in bloom, string lights across the garden, a catering spread that cost more per head than I made in a day. My mother had driven up the night before and we'd shared a hotel room, and in the morning she'd done my hair while I ate a granola bar over the bathroom sink, and she told me to be patient, that it was Marcus's day, that what mattered was that he was happy. "He is happy," I said. She looked at me in the mirror. "I know," she said quietly. "I just want you to be happy too." I thought about that a lot later. In the middle of everything, the ceremony was lovely. Marcus cried when Renata walked down the aisle, the real kind of crying. And I stood at the end of the row of bridesmaids and felt genuine love for him in that moment, uncomplicated and clean. He was happy. That was real. Whatever else was also real. The reception was where it started. I was seated at table 7. This might not sound significant, but the head table was in the center of the tent. Table 1 was for immediate family on Renata's side. Table 2 was for immediate family on Marcus's side. Our parents, our aunt, our cousins. And table 7 was near the back corner, next to the bar station, beside 2 of Renata's co-workers I had never met, and a college friend of Marcus's who spent most of the night on his phone. I sat down. I introduced myself to my table mates. I ordered a glass of Sauvignon Blanc and I looked across the tent at my mother at table 2 and she gave me a small, careful smile. Marcus didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to. I don't know which is worse. An hour into the reception, Renata's mother, her name is Cecily. She has hair that cost real money and a smile that never reaches her eyes, made her way over to our table to greet the coworkers. She acknowledged me with the kind of nod you give to someone who's held the elevator for you. "Natalie," she said. "So glad you made it. I know it must have been complicated with your job schedule." "Not at all," I said. "I cleared my calendar weeks ago." "Of course you did," she smiled. "Marcus has told us so much about your work. The construction side of things?" "Structural engineering," I said. "I'm currently the lead engineer on a highway overpass project in Savannah." "How interesting." She had already turned slightly away, reaching out to touch one of the coworkers' arms. "Doesn't she do interesting work?" she said to the table broadly, as if I were a child who had shown a drawing. I took a sip of my wine. The moment that broke it open happened about 2 hours later. I had stepped away from the table to find my mom, and on the way back I passed close to the head table where Renata was holding court with 3 of her friends, all of them glossy and flushed with champagne. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just walking. "Honestly, I don't know why Marcus insisted on including her in the wedding party," Renata was saying. She had her back half turned, and I don't think she saw me stop. "She just doesn't fit." She showed up to the engagement party looking like she came straight from a job site. One of her friends laughed. "Is she the one who drove that old—" "Yes," Renata said, "and she keeps correcting people about her job title, like it matters. Engineer, construction manager, or whatever. It's not exactly something you lead with at a black tie event." I stood there for 3 full seconds. Maybe 4. Long enough for one of the other friends to glance up and see me. Her expression changed. Renata noticed and turned. For a moment, she just looked at me. "Natalie," she said. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look uncomfortable for long. What she did was lift her chin just slightly and say, "I hope you're having a good time." There was something in her tone. Not cruelty exactly, but the confidence of someone who has never in her life had to worry about the consequences of her own words. The certainty that the worst that could happen was a slightly awkward moment. I looked at her. I thought about the 7 years I had spent studying and interning and working 60-hour weeks on job sites in Louisiana heat and January cold in Virginia. I thought about the bridge I'd spent 14 months designing over the Cape Fear River, the one that opened last spring, the one that my mother drove across 3 times just because she could. I thought about Renata's phrase, "Whatever. It's not exactly something you lead with." And the way she had said it, lightly, like my entire career was a minor embarrassing hobby. I said, "I'm having a wonderful time, Renata. Congratulations, again." And I turned and walked back to table 7. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I have been in situations that required more composure than that moment. I have delivered bad news to project owners, managed crew disputes on active job sites, sat across from city inspectors who were looking for reasons to reject work I'd spent months validating. I knew how to hold a face steady, but my hands were shaking when I picked up my wine glass. My mom found me about 20 minutes later. She put her hand on mine across the table and she didn't say anything, which meant she had probably heard something or seen something in my face earlier, or just knew me the way mothers know their children after 31 years. "I'm fine," I said. I know you are, she said. You always are. That's the thing that worries me. The toasts happened. Marcus's best man gave a speech that was funny and warm. Renata's maid of honor gave a speech that was mostly about Renata. The cake was cut. The dancing started. I was standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching Marcus spin Renata through the middle of their first dance, genuinely smiling, because he was happy. He was really happy. When someone stopped beside me. You're Marcus's sister. I turned. The man was in his early 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that was clearly expensive but not showy. He had the kind of posture that doesn't come from the gym. It comes from somewhere older than that, something built over decades. There was a precision to him that I registered before I registered anything else. I said. Natalie Odom. Richard Foss, he said. He extended his hand and we shook. His grip was firm and he made eye contact in the way people do when they genuinely mean to. I knew who he was. Renata's father, the dealership owner. But I hadn't met him until that moment. He'd been in delayed flights from a deal in Atlanta, I would learn later, and had arrived at the reception midway through dinner. What do you do, Natalie? He asked. I waited for the same note I'd heard all evening. The slight performance of the question, the setting up of the polite dismissal, it didn't come. He was just asking. Structural engineering, I said. Infrastructure, mostly. Highway projects, bridge design. He looked at me with more attention than I'd gotten from anyone at that party in 6 hours. Which firm? I told him. I know that firm, he said. They did the interchange work outside Charlotte, the I-485 extension. I was on that project, I said. Junior engineer at the time, but I was on it. He nodded slowly. That was a good piece of work. The lane transition design was clean. He paused. What are you working on now? We talked for 22 minutes. I know because I checked my phone later and could see the timestamp of the last text I'd sent my mom before the conversation started and where it picked up again afterward. 22 minutes, standing near the dance floor at my brother's wedding, talking about load capacity and soil composition and the specific challenges of designing over tidal waterways. Richard Foss, it turned out, had a civil engineering degree from Georgia Tech that he'd never formally used, gone into the family business instead after his father's health declined, but he'd never stopped being interested. He subscribed to 2 industry publications. He had opinions about a recent infrastructure bill that were specific and informed. He talked to me like I was a colleague, not like I was a curiosity, not like I was Marcus's sister who did the construction thing. At the end of it, he said, I owe you an apology. I frowned. For what? My wife mentioned where you were seated this evening, he said. He held my gaze directly, no deflection. That was not appropriate from Marcus's sister, and I should have been here earlier to ensure it was handled differently. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say for a moment. I was genuinely caught off guard. In my experience, people at that level of wealth and social position don't apologize. They explain, or they redirect, or they simply never acknowledge that anything was wrong. I appreciate that, I said. He nodded once. Then he said, Renata has a lot of qualities I'm proud of. Grace in understanding people whose lives look different from hers is something she's still learning. He paused. I hope she learns it. It was neither an excuse nor a full condemnation. It was the most honest thing anyone in that family had said to me all evening. The evening shifted after that. Not dramatically. There was no announcement, no confrontation, no moment of public reckoning. But Richard Foss, for the rest of the reception, included me. When his business partner came over and they fell into a conversation about a commercial real estate project in Durham, he turned and said, Do you know much about the structural requirements for mixed-use urban development? And when I said I did, he said, Good, weigh in on this, and I did. He said, Good, weigh in on this, and I did. And the business partner listened. When Cecily drifted over and her eyes landed on me with that same measured non-expression, Richard said, easily and without ceremony, Have you spoken with Natalie about her bridge project? Remarkable work. And he said it the way you say something that is simply true, not the way you say something to make a point. But the point was made. Renata noticed. I know because I caught her watching us from across the tent. Me and her father, standing with two of his colleagues, in the middle of an actual conversation, and something moved across her face that I couldn't fully read. Not shame, exactly. More like recalibration. Marcus noticed too. He came over around 9 o'clock, loosened tie, third drink in hand, and put his arm around my shoulders and said, "I see you met my dad-in-law." "We talked for a while," I said. Marcus squeezed my shoulder. "He doesn't talk to people for a while," he said quietly. "He's particular about that." I didn't say anything. Marcus looked at me for a moment. Really looked, the way he used to when we were kids and he was trying to figure out whether I was actually okay or just saying I was okay. "Nat," he said. "I'm good," I said. "I'm good," I said. "I'm really good." "Go dance with your wife." He hugged me, the real kind, and went. I left the wedding around 10:30. My mom and I drove back to the hotel and ordered room service fries at 11 p.m. and watched the end of a movie neither of us had seen the beginning of, and she fell asleep first and I lay in the dark for a while just thinking. Not about Renata, not about the table placement or the comments or the 6 hours of being made to feel like a minor inconvenience at my own brother's wedding. I thought about Richard Foss asking me which firm I worked for. I thought about the moment he said that was a good piece of work and meant it. I thought about the way a 22-minute conversation about tidal waterways and soil composition had felt like more genuine respect than anything I'd experienced all evening from the people who were supposed to be welcoming me into a family. I thought about my mother's face in the hotel bathroom mirror that morning. "I just want you to be happy too." The thing is, and this took me a while to understand, I was happy. Not despite what happened. Not in spite of Renata or her mother or Table 7. I was happy because I knew exactly who I was. I had built things that would outlast every person in that tent. Bridges don't care who your in-laws are. Load capacity doesn't adjust based on social hierarchy. The Cape Fear River runs under the bridge I designed whether I was seated at Table 2 or Table 7. What Renata had never understood, and what I think she began to that night, is that some people don't need to be acknowledged to know their worth. They've already done the math. The structure holds whether or not anyone shows up to admire it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Marcus called me on a Tuesday night. "I want to apologize," he said. "For what?" I said, though I knew. "For not paying closer attention," he said. "For not making sure you felt like you mattered there. Because you do. You matter more to me than I showed." I was quiet for a moment. I was in my apartment in Raleigh, in my work clothes still, half a glass of iced tea on the counter. "Marcus," I said, "you married someone you love. You were happy. I saw it. That's what I was there for." "That's not all you were there for." "No," I admitted, "but it's what I held on to." He exhaled. "Renata talked to her dad. After. He apparently made clear that he has a lot of respect for you, professionally. Personally. Personally. He said some things that I think she needed to hear." I didn't respond to that. It wasn't my conversation to have had. "She's not a bad person," Marcus said. She grew up in a world where certain things were the measure of someone, and you don't fit neatly into her measuring system, and that made her uncomfortable, and she handled it badly." "I know," I said. And I did. I had known that from the first evening, the engagement party, the comment about my scar. Some people build their self-worth by arranging everyone else into a legible hierarchy. When someone doesn't fit, it frightens them. "I still should have done better," he said. "Yeah," I said. "You should have, but you're doing it now. That counts." There was a long pause. Then, "I love you, Nat." "I love you too," I said. "You're my brother. That doesn't change." What I didn't tell him, what I didn't say out loud to anyone until much later, is what I had felt in that moment standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching Richard Fosse walk away after our conversation to rejoin the head table. That strange quiet settling inside my chest. Not triumph, not vindication, something smaller and more durable than either of those things. I had walked into that wedding as someone's awkward, inconvenient sister, the one who drives an old car and works in construction, the one who couldn't quite manage cocktail formal. I had been moved to the back corner and introduced with qualifications and whispered about at the head table. And none of it, not one word of it, had been true. There is a particular freedom in knowing your own value so thoroughly that other people's failure to see it doesn't shake you. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It does hurt. Being unseen by people you expected to welcome you, that is a specific kind of loneliness that lives in the chest for days. But the hurt and the knowing exist at the same time. The foundation doesn't fail because someone refuses to look at it. I am a structural engineer. I know what holds and what doesn't. I have stood on bridges I designed and felt the concrete solid under my feet, and the river moving far below, and I have thought, this will be here long after I am gone. Not because I am exceptional, because the work was done right, piece by piece, under pressure, over time, with no one watching. That is who I am, table 7 or not. The scar on my hand has faded a little over the years. Not gone, just quieter. A reminder of a different kind of night when I was 19, trying to hold things together with both hands and coming away marked for it. I don't cover it anymore. I stopped doing that a long time ago. I've thought a lot about what Richard said to me that night. Not the part about the bridge project, though that mattered more than I showed. The part where he said Renata was still learning how to see people whose lives looked different from hers. He didn't excuse it. He didn't dress it up. He just named it plainly, the way you name a structural problem you haven't yet fixed. Not to ignore it, but because honesty is the first step toward anything holding. That's what I keep coming back to. Honesty and what it costs people to offer it. Renata spent that entire evening arranging everyone around her into a hierarchy that made her comfortable. I was at the bottom of it. Table 7. Old car. The construction thing. And the reason I was at the bottom wasn't because I had done anything wrong. It was because I didn't make her feel superior, and people who have built their identity around being at the top of a room need everyone else sorted neatly below them. When someone doesn't fit the sorting system, it creates a kind of panic. And panic, in people who have never been taught to examine themselves, comes out as contempt. I understand that now. I didn't excuse it then. I don't excuse it now. But I understand it, and understand it in understanding it is different from being destroyed by it. What I keep thinking about is the cause and the effect, not in any abstract sense, but in the plainest practical way. Renata treated me like a minor inconvenience at her wedding because she had spent years being told that her measuring system was the correct one. Her mother modeled it. Her social circle reinforced it. No one ever sat across from her and said, "You are getting this wrong." And so she kept getting it wrong, bigger and louder each time, until the night her own father looked past her at a woman she had dismissed and said, without drama or performance, "That was a good piece of work." That is not punishment. That is just consequence. The way a structure built on faulty load assumptions eventually shows the error, not because the universe is punishing the engineer, but because physics doesn't negotiate. I think about the years I spent building something real while Renata was building something that looked impressive from the outside. I wasn't competing with her. I didn't even know I was in a race. I was just doing the work. 60-hour weeks, job sites in January, 14th-month stretches on a single project, because the work mattered to me and I was good at it, and that was enough reason. I wasn't storing it up for a moment like that wedding. There was no strategy. But here is what I've learned, and I mean this with no performance attached to it. Integrity accumulates. Every choice you make toward honesty, toward rigor, toward doing a thing correctly even when no one is watching, it compounds. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't announce itself. It just builds quietly the way a bridge is built from the foundation up, most of the work invisible under the surface. And then one day someone asks which firm and were you on that project, and 22 minutes later you are in the middle of a real conversation with a man who can tell clean lane transition design from sloppy work, and the years don't feel wasted at all. Renata is learning. I believe that. Not because I am generous by nature. I am not especially generous. But because her father is an honest man, and honest fathers have a way of eventually getting through. Marcus is trying. That counts. And me. I drove home in my old car, and I thought about the Cape Fear River, and I thought about the concrete under my feet on the day the bridge opened, and I thought, this holds. That is everything. That has always been everything.